as we continue discussing about trading issues. In this lecture, we'll be studying about threat cancellation. So we'll be seeing what are the issues that we face in trading when threat cancellation is involved. So first, let us try to understand what do we actually mean by threat cancellation. So threat cancellation is the task of terminating a thread before it has completed. So if a threat gets canceled before its execution is complete, then that is known as threat cancellation. So when we say a threat is canceled, we mean that before the threat could complete its execution, it was terminated. Now let us take some examples to understand when does threat cancellation occurs and what are the issues that we can face when threat cancellations occur. So in the first example, if multiple threats are concurrently searching through a database and one threat returns the result, the remaining threats might be canceled. So let us say that we have a database and we are searching through the database for a particular value or a particular result. So according to the search algorithm, many threats may be involved in searching for that particular value in that database. Now if one of the thread finds said value in the database, then we have gone the result. That means we got the result that we were searching for. So the remaining threats can be canceled, or they might be canceled because they don't need to continue searching because the result is already obtained. So that is one scenario where threat cancellations can occur. Now let's take another example. When a user presses a button on the web browser that stops a web page from loading any further, all threats loading the pages are canceled. This is a real-life example that you must have seen in your day-to-day life. So when you are using a web browser for surfing the internet, you know that there is a cancel button that is there in the web browser. So when a web page is loading, if you press on that cancel button, what happens is the entire web page stops loading any further. So what happens is that when you try to visit a web page, when you click on any web page, as a web page loads, there are several threats involved in loading of that web page. So when a web page loads, you know that there are so many things in their web page. The web page may contain images, it may contain text, it may contain hyperlinks, it may contain so many things. Now for loading each and every of these elements, different threats are responsible. All these threats work together and they load the entire web page. Now in the process of loading that web page, if you press the button that stops the loading of the web page, then what happens is all the threats that were involved in loading the different elements, like images or text or whatever it may be, everything will be canceled. All those threats will be terminated before it has completed. Some might have completed, or some may still be in the process of completion. It will depend upon when you press that button. So many threats may be canceled before it completed its execution. So that is another example where we can see cancellation of threats. Now a thread that is to be canceled is often referred to as a target threat. So whenever we use the term target thread, keep in mind that this is a thread that has to be canceled. Now let us see what are the different types of threat cancellation that can occur, or what are the different scenarios in which threat cancellations can occur, and let us see which one among them is better and which one among them will provide a stable computation. So as I said, we will now see the different scenarios in which thread cancellations can occur. So here it says that cancellation of a target threat may occur in two different scenarios, and let us see what are those scenarios one by one. So the first scenario is asynchronous cancellation. So what is this? Asynchronous cancellation. One thread immediately terminates the target thread. So this is very straightforward and it is very direct. What happens is one thread immediately terminates the target thread. So what is a target thread? A target thread is the thread that is to be canceled, and another thread that is going to cancel that target thread immediately cancels that target thread. So this target thread is like a victim, which has no power. When some other thread cancels it, it has no other choice than to be canceled. So that is what we mean by asynchronous cancellation. Now let's look at the other scenario. Now the other scenario is known as differ cancellation. In differ cancellation, the target thread periodically checks whether it should terminate, allowing it an opportunity to terminate itself in an orderly fashion. So unlike the asynchronous cancellation, where the target thread was immediately canceled by another thread, in default cancellation, what happens is that the target thread will periodically check whether it should terminate itself or not. So nobody can just come and terminate it immediately without its permission. So the target thread will periodically check whether it should terminate, and hence that allows it an opportunity for it to terminate itself in an orderly fashion. So here we can say that the thread is having some power. It will not be canceled directly by any other thread, but it will cancel itself in an orderly fashion after making sure that it can be canceled. So that is what we mean by default cancellation. So now the question arises where the difficulty with cancellation lies. We have discussed about threat cancellation, and we have seen the different scenarios in which a threat can be canceled. But the question is, where is the difficulty with cancellation? What is the problem or issue that we face with threat cancellation? So let's take a look into that. So here is where the difficulty lies. In situations where resources have been allocated to a canceled threat. That means a threat was under execution, and it was allocated to contain resources of our system. Because threats may require different resources, and resources are allocated to the threats. So when a threat is holding some resources, and it gets canceled, then there could be a problem. So we will see what is a problem. But before that, let's look at the second point also. So it says a threat is canceled while in the midst of updating data. It is sharing with other threats. So this is a serious problem. So there may be data that is shared between different threats. So different threats can be writing or updating into that shared region of data. Now when a thread is updating that shared data, if it gets canceled in the midst of that updation, then it could be a problem. Because when it is updating something gets canceled, then that update was not complete, and it becomes a incomplete data. And then when other threads are going to share that, they may be reading some incomplete data from there. So that is a situation where the difficulty of cancellation lies. Now let us come back to the first point. Here I said resources have been allocated to a canceled thread. So what is the problem with this? So the thing is that when resources are allocated to a thread, often the operating system will reclaim the system resources from a canceled thread, but will not reclaim all the resources. So when a thread is allocated resources, and if it gets canceled, then they always will, by default, reclaim the system resources from the canceled thread. But in some cases, it may not be able to reclaim all the resources. So canceling a thread asynchronously may not free a necessary system-wide resource. So we already discussed asynchronous cancellation. That is when a thread is immediately canceled by some other thread without any further notice. That cancel thread or the target thread may be holding some necessary system-wide resource now. Only when the thread completes execution, it will release that resource. But before it completes execution, while it is still holding that resource, if it gets synchronously canceled, it has no option then being canceled, and it may not actually release that resource, and hence that resource may become unavailable. So that is one problem that we have with asynchronous cancellation. But in most cases, they always will reclaim the system resources from a canceled thread. But in some cases, to not be able to do so. So in those cases, asynchronous cancellation is not a very good technique. So what is the other technique that we have? It is default cancellation. So with default cancellation, one thread indicates that a target thread is to be canceled. But cancellation occurs only after the target thread has checked the flag to determine if it should be canceled or not. This allows a thread to check whether it should be canceled at a point when it can be canceled safely. So this is a much safer and a much better way of cancellation, instead of directly going and canceling a thread immediately, as in the case of astronomous cancellation. With default cancellation, what happens is when one thread that is a target thread has to be canceled, the thread that is going to cancel it will indicate that this target thread has to be canceled. But will it be canceled immediately? No, the cancellation will occur only after the target thread has checked itself and has determined that it is in a position to be canceled. So if it is holding some system-wide resource, or if it is in some critical situation where it is not safe to be canceled, then it will not be canceled. The trend has the power to defer the cancellation, so it will only cancel at a point when it can be canceled safely. So that is the better way of thread cancellation that we have, which is defer cancellation. So we see that the issue that we face in threat cancellation, and we saw the two scenarios in which it can be canceled, and we see that most of the problem in threading issues that is faced due to threat cancellation can be solved if we adopt this deferred cancellation technique. So I hope this lecture about threat cancellation, which leads to threading issues, was clear to you. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.